Thank you all for coming. K'tvach, we're learning as a schutz for Shleima Filan Chaya Baserach, and for Meir Ben Cyril Peril. We are on Daf Memches Amid Beis, 5 lines from the top by the 2 dots. Itma. Machatz Shenim Tzos Bereya. The new topic that we're going to be discussing for the next Amud or so, blot, about a needle that was found inside a lung. It means after you shechted an animal, you find a needle sitting there. This is talking about an actual sewing needle, the kind with a hole at one end that you put the thread through. So what's the din? Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Chanina, Machsheri, they say it's kosher. Shimon Lakish, Rabbi Mani, Bar Patish, Rabbi Shimon ben Eliakim, Tarfi, they say it's treif. The Gemara is going to explain what are the two tzadim. Why would we say it's treif, and why would we say it's a treifa, and why would we say it's not? One holds, one group really, there's 3 people on each side, holds that when something is missing from the material that makes up the inside of the lung, that is considered a chesaron, that it's something's missing and it makes it possible. And the other one holds it's not a chesaron. Rashi explains that the reason you'd have a chesaron is because when the needle is lodged inside of the lung, we're not at this point even thinking of how it got there, but while it's there, the metal causes irritation, and it makes some of the material of the lung to shrink back away from the metal, and it disappears. So if you're missing some of the material inside the lung, that's the machlekes. Is it considered to be that the lung is mechoser and it's possible or not? So the Gemara quickly rejects that, and that's not what we're going to come up. That's not going to be the issue. Everyone agrees that what's missing from the lung does not make it into a treifa. This is what the issue is. They're arguing about how this needle got here. And if Menachem or anyone else who's skilled in anatomy can help me, I'm happy to, I don't really understand what I'm saying. But the simpuna, it seems to me, are the parts when a person breathes, they take air in through their trachea, and it goes to the lungs, and in the lungs there are these spongy materials that absorb the oxygen and somehow convey it into the blood, which then gets into the heart and gets pumped around the body. Is anything egregiously wrong with that description?
I've been a fan of all your scientific anatomy until now. It's been very good.
So if I didn't go off the rails? I honestly don't understand these things. I really don't. I'm trying to figure it out.
Yes, you got it right.
I remember I only got a 93 on biology back in high school.
I didn't do that well.
Yeah, that was one of my lower marks. So anyway, so one holds simpuna nakat, that the needle traveled through the route that we just described. The animal breathed it in through the trachea, not through the esophagus. It didn't swallow it like the way you normally swallow something. It somehow breathed it in, and it went down the windpipe, and then somehow crossed through the interface into the blood, or not even to the blood. It made it into the inside of the lungs, directly from through the kana. The other one holds nekuvi nekav asai. The other mandamar says no, it's not typical for a needle to go through the lungs. He swallowed it, and it must have pierced out of the digestive system. At some point, it left the esophagus or one of the stomachs, and it found its way into the lungs. And if it did that, then it had to have gone through the outside of the lungs, which is a nekev, a puncture in the lungs, which we said in the Mishnah, Nelu Trefus. In the first Mishnah, we said one of the things that makes an animal a trefa, if there's a hole in the lungs, even if it gets covered over, even if it scars over, we said that's not it's not considered to be a covering, and it's going to be a trefa. Rashi explains that as the Gemara is going to be clear, we'll see this from the sequence of the Gemara, that the the reason that they checked this lung that had the needle in it, they didn't see a hole in it. So that's why, like, it would seem like a ridiculous comparison. It's much more likely an animal would swallow something than breathe it in. But because there was no hole in the lung, there was more reason to assume that it came through the trachea rather than through the digestive system. But like we said, it could be that there was a hole, it got covered up, which would still be a treifa. So that's what the machlekes is. Okay. Hahi machta. Distakach b'chitucha dereya. A slightly different variation of this. The first case we talked about was that you found a needle inside a full lung that you checked and you saw there were no holes in it. This is after they cut apart the lungs and they found a needle after they shechted the animal and cut up the lungs, so there's no way to check anymore if it has a hole in it, and they found the needle at that point. Aisula kameder of Ami. They brought it to Rav Ami to get a psak. Savalach shurei. He said, I think it sounds like it's kosher. Eisver Yirmiyah v'teim Rav Zreika. One of these Amoraim asked, we said in the Mishnah, Hareish and Nikvai shechasra, a lung that has a hole in it. Well, that's missing something. My chasra. What does it mean that it's missing? If you're talking about the outside, hainu nikiva, nikva, that's the same thing as a puncture. It's missing on the outside. Ella mibifnim. Elamai must be it's something missing on the inside. You see that a chesaron on the inside is a chesaron. So this kasha is not really such a good kasha. We had this before in the Gemara, and we said no, it could be that it's not talking about a chesaron mibifnim. It's talking about a chesaron mibechutz, and according to Reb Shimon, I think it was Reb Shimon ben Elazar. But anyway, the Manda Amr who says that it needs to go all the way, I think it's Rav Shimon actually, and it has to go not just into the outside of the lungs, it has to go all the way to the Simpon HaGadol. It has to pierce all the way into these spongy materials. So, and according to that, the chesaron is that it's saying that if it's missing on the outside, even if it didn't go all the way through, according to that Manda Amr, it will be possible. That's what chesaron is. It doesn't mean a chesaron on the inside. So So we didn't have really a conclusion with Rav Ami. Rav Ami wanted a machshir, and they asked the question. So they figured they'll go to Yitzchak Nafcha. Savalachshur, the same thing happened. He wanted to say it's kasher. Eser Yom Yivitem Rav Zreika Reish Nikva Shechaser My Chaser Lem B'chot Hayin Nekiva Lam Mifnim Shamei Chasar Mifnim Shmei Chisaron. So they had the same kasha with the same implicit answer that the Gemara doesn't speak out. So since nothing was really conclusive by asking in the past, they asked Rav Ami, then asked Rav Yitzchak Nafka, they didn't have an answer, they went back to Rav Ami. The Tarfa, the second time around, he says it's treif. When you find a needle inside of a cut up piece of lung. Amrlev Harabanan Machshri. So of course, they said back to him, now you're saying that it's treif, but we have a machlokes. There were 3 Rabbanan who said, if you find a needle in a lung, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar, and Rabbi Chanina says it's kosher, so why are you ignoring them? Amalahen, heinich shiru shiyoidem eizet tamech shiru. They were machshurit because they had a good reason to be machshurit. Like we said, they said, you checked the lung, and there was no hole in it, so most likely the needle did not go through, but rather it came through the windpipe, through the kana, and therefore never made a nekev in the lungs. It didn't come from the outside of the lungs. It came from the vascular system that ends up in the lungs. But anan is a tam nachsher. But we don't have a reason to be machsher in this place where the lung was cut up before you checked it. Dilmi havareya come on minkava. Maybe if the lung was here, meaning what hadn't been cut up, we could check and see that it has a nekev, and then we would say it's possible. We wouldn't assume, and then it would if you see a nekev, then it's certainly possible. Zaknumar. Time of the lesson. It's masha from this that the only reason why this is going to be a treifa, in this case where it's cut up, is because you can't check it for nekava. Isa, v'loy minkava kshera. It's mashma that if it was there and you could check it and it doesn't have a hole in it, we'd say it's kosher. We wouldn't assume that it came from the outside and made a hole. In fact, the Gemara of Amar of Nachman, Haisam Puna de Reya, the Inkav, treifa. Rav Nachman said that um, according to Rav Nachman, he says that if you have a hole, not just in the outside of the lungs, but even in the simpuna, in these whatever they call them, these in spongy materials inside of the lungs, if you hold, those are also they constitute tubes,
You talking
right?
about alveoli?
Yeah, I can't pronounce that word. It's hopeless. But it sounds like it gets consolidates into tubes, right? The alveoli are get into like some part of the circulatory system, and they send it out as blood.
Yes, hemoglobin.
Blood
I
is
don't,
hemoglobin.
I don't want to complicate things, but yes,
Blood contains hemoglobin. But what are those? What are those called? Those are veins or arteries or
arterioles. That
arterioles. They
whatever.
bring they're going to
The way you explained it before is perfect.
okay. In any case, but there is some tubes involved in the simpunin. And Rav Nachman says if there's a hole in those tubes, that's also a neck of the apostles. So if you're saying that the needle came through the simpunin, why are we worried about the neck of that they caused? We say he says it's treifa. Zok Gemara, hahul chaveri itma. That's talking about a very specific case that Rav Nachman said it's going to be a treifa. That's where the needle was right at the junction where one of these arteries or part of the arterial system split off. And in that particular case, if the needle went from right after it split off from one to the other, since it's at that junction, it's very the walls of the artery are hard. They don't heal. But in the softer parts of the simpunin, it would heal. Zak Gemara. Is that really true that we say that it's something is by the joint, by the junction of two different simpunin, that's going to be a treifa? Or Nachman, Hai Hadura de Kanta. The Kanta is the fats that surround the intestine. So you have which is the hadura? Let me look at Rashi. Hadura the kanta dakan hasayvin oisisaviv kalgula. That's the intestines. The intestines go in. They circle around. That
Coil of the intestine. There's a picture in our article.
yeah. I'm just trying to figure out which one is kanta. What is kanta? Rashi says kanta. Oh, Antelas, Chalev Tar, Antler. I figured out what that word meant before. Antler? No. Okay. Anyway, that's the chela, that's the fats. The kanta is the fats that surround the intestines. So hadura the kanta, the intestines next to these fats, the inkev lahadichav, right? Yet the intestines twists around and it goes next to another piece of intestines. If you have a hole between them, that it goes from one to the other, Megan aleh, it stops. It closes up the hole, so it's not considered a nekev in the daken, which is the intestines. So why do we say when you have by the simpon that you have holes in two parts of the simpon that it's going to be treifa, and over here we have two holes in the intestines? We say it protects, it blocks the chaver, the other intestine covers up the hole. Amravashi, Trefus kamadami ladodi. You're asking questions about Trefus. Ain't even betar v'zu doim lezu. You don't compare, you don't assume because in one part of the body, in one type of organ, that it's megan, that a hole is blocked by an adjoining organ. That means that but the same thing will hold true by the simpunin. And how do we know that's true? Shari choytcha mikan umesa choytcha mikan v'choya. One can cut an animal's leg, and if you cut it higher up, closer to the heart and closer to the body, the main part of the body, to the torso, it will be kosher. And lower down, the animal will be a treifa. So you see that you can't do things by logic. You can't assume that because in our simple logic, the higher up it is, the more damaging it should be. We see it's not true. So therefore, the same thing. Don't try to make a zustellt. Don't try to compare what we find by the intestines to what we find by the lungs. Ahi machta de stakach besampuna rabba de reya. They found a needle. Before we were talking about where you found the needle actually in the lungs. As we said before, the simpuna is only part of the material inside of the lungs. There's some other stuff there. I guess it's just flesh, basar. If you remember, we said we put it into a bowl, and if you saw white streaks, it means that there's simpuna in it. So it's two different things. So before we talked about it was found in the actual walls of the lung, of the material of the lung. But over here, it was found in the empty space. We said there's a lot of nodes that make up the lung. This is the biggest node in the lungs. Asul kamei de Rabbanan trufai. They brought it to the Rabbanan, who had said that if you find the needle inside, not inside of the cavity of the large node, but rather you found it in the lung itself, and they said it's treifa. Over here, they didn't answer. They didn't answer either way. They didn't say that it's mutter because they were the Rabbanan who said that you find a needle in a ray that it's usher. It's another amirba. It's a nami le'ami, but neither did they say it's usher. Kiva b'desimpuna rabish takach ema sempuna noket v'asoy. Since they found it in this, since they found it mamish right in the middle of the simpuna rabba, so before the case where we said that it's going to be, they said it's treifa. That's what was found in the material of the lung, which means it first went through the simpuna rabba and then worked its way into the flesh of the lung, so to speak. But if it was still in that cavity, they say it's more likely that it came straight from the trachea and down the windpipe straight into the large cavity of the lung, which is, I guess, where the air goes first, rather than that it came from the digestive system, works its way all the way through the lungs and got all the way to the simpuna rabba. I think this is like the entrance into the lungs, and so therefore it's more likely it came from. They said it's possible that would be mutter, or wouldn't be considered a trait. There was a needle. Till now we were talking about a needle that was found in the lungs. Now we're talking about that you found it in the liver, in a piece of liver. Now we have to remember, a liver that doesn't have the din that a neck of passes. A liver, you have to either have any amount, a minimal amount, or a kazayas, but it's certainly a nekev is not going to make it a treifa. Sava Mar Breder of Yosef Lamitrafa. He wanted to say it's treifa. Amalei Rashi ilustaker bisachai gavna havitar of Mar. He said if you'd find in the basar of the animal a needle, would you say it's treifa? So why are you saying? Why would you think that if you found a needle in the liver that it should be treifa? Elo Amar Ravashi. So Ravashi says no. Chazina, you have to look at it. If the hole of the needle, which is much thicker than the needle itself, so obviously it didn't come from somehow the Gemara is saying there's two possibilities how it got to the liver. It could have gone all the way through the air system, the breathing system. It went through the trachea, through the lungs somehow, and finagled its way all the way to the liver. So, but if you found that the head of the needle is outside of the liver, so the head of the needle is much thicker. It wouldn't have forced its way out of the liver. So you must assume in that case that the animal swallowed it and it came out of the digestive system and stuck itself into the neck, into the liver from the outside. So then the liver is not really the problem. The problem is we know at some point it left the veshet and it left the esophagus. It went to the digestive system and they made a neck of there, and that's what passels it. The cupola give, but if the head of the needle is inside of the liver, simpuna nokat vasai, then we assume it, like we said, it went through the lungs, through the kana and the lungs, and worked its way into the liver. Vahani mili balimta. This is only in a large needle that has a big eye, which would get stuck. It wouldn't be able to force its way out of the if it was in the liver through the from the trachea and through the simpunin and all the way out there. The thick end would not have been able to force itself out of the liver. So if we find the thick end out of the liver, we must assume it came from the digestive system. Alva katinta, if it's a narrow needle, a very thin needle, then if we find it sticking in the liver, there's no reason to assume it came from the outside or the inside. There's no thick end, so it could have just come from inside of the liver. It doesn't make a difference which direction the end is going. We're always going to have to assume that it came through the digestive system and made a nekev in somewhere along the line, the esophagus or one of the stomachs, and it's a nekev that passes. Zok the Gemara. I'm sorry. How is that different? That if someone finds a needle that's embedded in the Beis HaKaisis, which is one of I think it's the second of the four stomachs of a ruminant. So we say that if a needle is found partially, not all the way through that wall, so we say mitzad echad ksher, if it didn't go all the way through both of the layers of the Beis HaKaisis, it's kasher. Mishneis adam treifa. We don't say that, obviously, if the thick end is on the inside, there's no way that could have come in all the way from the outside. But if it's on the outside, meaning past the first barrier and before the second one, then we'll say that it must have come outside. So we say we're not caring about it. So no, Amri Hasam, even though the thick head of the needle of the machat is toward the outside. Since there's a lot of food and drinks that pass through the digestive system by the Beis HaKaisis, so that pushed it into the wall, in spite of the fact that you found that the head of the needle, which is really too thick normally to go through the wall, but it was able to push it through because there's so much food pushing it. But by the kaved, where it's just blood cannot push it through. You have to assume if the head is through the wall that it came from the outside and it made a nekev. Hello? Yeah, quickly, I'm in the middle of my share. I can't do it now. I'm in the middle of my share. I can't do it now. I'm sorry. It was a call from Chicago. I don't know what he wanted from me. It's my brother. Zak Gemara. Yeah. So that's the difference. Ahu machta de shtakach besampuna. there was a machet, a needle, that was found in the Sampuna Rabba de Kevda. It seems that the arteries don't just go inside of the liver. I think this is like a general word for the circulatory system. So the large artery that brings blood into the kaved, Hunamar Breder of Idi Tarf. He says it's treifa. Ravad Yumi Machsher. He says it's kosher. Rashi explains. Rashi says that the reason why he said it's treifa, the Gesava Nukunak V'Shanichsel Derech Haveshet, Nekaras Haveshet Aidakim V'Yatsa, that it must have come through. He held it must have come through the digestive system, and it found itself in this space inside, or this artery inside of the kaved. The other man says Maksher says since it's found inside of an artery, it's more likely that it came from the blood system, from the lungs, from the kana, not from the veshet. Sheilu l'Ravina, they asked Ravina, Amalhu shakilu glima de trufai. You should take away the coat of the one who says that it's treifa, because he was incorrect. He really should have said it's kosher, and therefore he has to pay back the person who threw out. He said it's a treifa, and he had to throw it out instead of eating it. It cost him money, so the Rav who made an incorrect psak has to pay him back. Hahi kashisa, there was this kashisa, I think, is a grain. The shtakach b'mara that was found in the gallbladder. Omer Ravashi, Kavina Bey Rav Kahana, when I asked Rav Kahana, Amar Havadei Simpuna Nakat Vasai. The gallbladder is, I guess, it's somehow it's not part of the digestive system per se, it seems. It's part of the blood system. I wouldn't have thought that. That's the way it seems to be. He says it must have come through the air system, through the circulatory system. Avagav Deloy Konafka, even though this is a grain, even though this is a grain that it's hard to understand how it got to the simpuna of the liver, the Rashi explains that it has to have gone through that whole system, like we explained. It gets to the liver through the lungs and through all that, but then it has to go from the liver to the gallbladder, which I think are next to each other. What does Rashi say?
The gallbladder's on top is actually found under, like the under the liver.
It's adjoining it, right? But they're not attached.
They're attached by that one vessel. That's probably what it's referring to.
Right. So it must have gone through that vessel, even though this is a grain. It's not a needle, so it's significantly wider. So it wouldn't naturally be able to bridge that gap or go through. It seems like there's a lot of gravity. Like you said, the gallbladder is underneath the kaved. So as the animal is going, eventually it pushes itself through a space that's not really wide enough. But for it to go into the gallbladder from the digestive system, it would have to make a massive nekev. It wouldn't be just a nekev. It doesn't really have the ability. It's not pointed, so it wouldn't be able to make it from the digestive system into the gallbladder. The hanimili, the dikla, that is only from a date. This is a date pit that's rounder. Aval de zesa, but an olive pit, mivza baza, that's more pointed, and it's possible that it could push its way. So we have to be chayshish that it came from the digestive system and it was made a nekev and it's treif. Amr of Yochanan, lama nikra shma reya. Why is the lung called a reya? Shemeira esainayin. That I guess eating the lungs brings brightens a person's eyes. Ibayalu lachila al yidei simonim. Is it just if you eat it on its own, or do you have to eat it together with certain spices? Said the Gemara says Tashma. Amar Huna bar Yehuda avza bezuza v'reya dida ba'arba. A goose is sold for one zuz, and its lungs, the lungs of a goose are sold for 4 zuzim. If you say you just take the lungs and eat it as is, linka bezuzah v'leichel. Why would anyone ever buy a lung of a goose for 4 zuzim if you could just get the whole goose together with the lung for 1? It must mean that it requires very specific types of cooking and spices that will make it more expensive. The tavcha is the person who shechs the animal, but he also part of his job is to pull out the lungs and check them. But when he pulls out the lungs, it's possible that his fingers in grabbing it can make a hole or cause a problem. So what happened if you found a hole in the lungs in the part where the butcher will grab it when he's pulling it out? Talina no loy talina. Do we say it happened because his hands caused it? Or do we say no, it was a nekev that was there from before? We say it was because of the butcher and it's kosher. We can't assume that he caused it. It's you have to worry that it might be a nekev. The halacha is that we can depend that the butcher did it, and therefore it's not a treif. Abba, Rabavo, whose father, Meresha Kali de Rafram Hava, he was one of the people who expounded the halachas of Rafram, V'ama Talinan. And he says that he heard from Rafram that it's mutter. Amru Kamei Lahadam Mazutra Brei de Reb Mari. They said this to Mazutra, who he said Loi Talinan, and he was not makablet. Av Mishashi Kavase Davua da Abba Mistavra. Mishashi has said that it's like I think Rafram was his, I think that, or Bavo, I think was his grandfather. Talinan he said that Talinan, that it's mutter, because we find that we also say it's mutter bezev murna by where a
Wolf.
what do you call it? A wolf grabbed an animal, and you find a hole in the intestines, and we could see that it was the bite of the wolf. And we said, do we say that the wolf caused the hole, or do we say was there a hole there previously, and the wolf just happened to bite in the same spot? So we say talinan. We say that it must be the wolf who did it. So we see that he held that you can't be toila in the circumstances. We don't say we have to worry that maybe there was a nekkah before. Pligi bar Rav Yosef bar Dusoy v'Rabbanan. The machlokes between Rav Yosef bar Dusoy and the Rabbanan. Chad amar koydem shchita parish, v'chad amar la'achash shchita parish. One says that. I'm sorry, I skipped something.
You skipped morno. There's one word.
No, bezev, bezev. Talina bezev. I'm sorry, you're right. So I said it wrong. It's talina bezev. We're title in the zev. Murna. Murna is a worm that was found inside of in the ray. The question is, this worm that you find outside the lungs, that it made a hole in the lung. The question is, did it happen while the animal was alive, so it had a nekev, so it was already a treifa? Or do you say, because the animal died, made the worm realize this is not a hospitable place to stay, and it left after it died, and therefore it's not a treifa. Parish. Halacha is, we assume that it left after shchita. Okay, let's do one more shtickle. Rav Shimon said, l'simpuna. Rav Shimon said that it's not enough to have a hole in the lungs, it has to go down to the simpuna, to these alveoli, the spongy matter. Amar Rabba, Batachlif, Amar Rav Yirmiyah, Rabba, Achinaka l'simpun gadol. He teaches it means it doesn't mean that it goes just to the spongy matter, it means it has to go into the large, I think, ventricle of the lungs, the largest area that gets the air into it. Yosef Ravacha Baraba Kamei Rav Huna. Yosef Amar Amar Rabbi Meloich Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Halacha Rav Shimon. He said halacha is like Rav Shimon. Amalei Meloich Arba Kamar. You're talking about this Rabbi Meloich who is from Saudi Arabia. Ein halacha Reb Shimon ka'amar. He didn't say the halacha is like Reb Shimon. He said the halacha is not like Reb Shimon. Kisalik Reb Zeirish ashkechel Reb Bibi di Yasem ka'amar. Amar leich Amar Yishuv Levi halacha Reb Shimon. He said the halacha is like Reb Shimon. Amar leich Chai demar da'anav Reb Chia bar Abba Reb Asi. Ikleinin la'aseh de Reb Meloich. We came to where he was, Reb Meloich. For Armi lei Yamar mar halacha Reb Shimon. We asked him, did you say the halacha is like Reb Shimon? Amalon in halacha Reb Shimon. He said the halacha is like him. Amri. Va'at ma biyadich. And what do you have that says not like that? That he said that halacha is like Reb Shimon. Gemara passes the end. Vein halacha Reb Shimon. In the end, we don't pass like Reb Shimon. We pass like the Chum. It just has to. You have a nekev in the lungs. It doesn't have to go all the way to the simpon. As long as there's a nekev, it passes. Okay, we'll stop over here. Yasher Kayach. Tomorrow it's going to get, believe it or not, even more technical. So.